Hi everyone, this is the video that goes along with chapter 6, the chapter on how personality remains pretty stable across the lifespan. So we've talked about traits, we've introduced them, studied them in the last chapter, and now let's talk about sort of what stays the same and what changes. So there is rank order consistency, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But your childhood, when we talk about children, we talk about them having a temperament rather than a personality. Temperament is partly biological, and so we'll talk about that when we get to the biology of personality, or we'll talk about it more. But if you were an agreeable child, then all of your experiences were different, and so people approached you, people spent more time with you. And because they spent more time with you, you had different experiences than a child who perhaps had a hard time with transitions, cried a lot. People were a little bit more reticent, and that changed how they interpreted your reactions and how they reacted to you. So a child that is relatively impulsive, turns into an adult who might talk louder. A child who's relatively inhibited might turn into somebody who it might then take them longer to find some relationships, find stable relationships later in life. So there is some stability, but there's also change. And so I think it's important to know that your personality is not determined by your early experiences, but it is influenced by those. So temperament, partly biological. There are certain things, though, in a child's life that they can't control at all. So when you think about, what their parents were like, what their parents might have been going through, and how the child experienced that, or nice things, good things that the parents did, or advantages that the child might have, and we'll get to the concept of thrownness a little bit later in this semester. But there's certain things that the child can't control, but that definitely influence the development of their personality over time. Birth order. It comes up several times in this in the study of personality. Birth order it's a messy variable. It's really hard to use that to predict anything, and the effect sizes tend to be pretty small. So I would say that birth order probably has less of an impact, but it's such a hard thing to study that it's kind of hard to say in any definitive way. The book talks about different person-environment transactions, and this is something that we study in developmental psychology as well. If you are an outgoing person, then you might seek out environments that allow you to express that outgoingness. If you're a relatively quiet person, you might seek out environments or experiences that allow you to remain quiet and relatively unobtrusive. So that would be an active person-environment transaction. A reactive person-environment interaction is just what it sounds like. You're reacting to the things that happen to you. And when you think about memories that you might have of childhood experiences or experiences in your life where you and somebody else differ on how you remember that thing, well, who's right? You're probably both right because you experienced it differently because of your personality. So loud noises, big events. If somebody has high dispositional reactivity, that might be a different kind of an experience for them. It might be very frightening, where for somebody who really likes those kinds of things and the experience is not overwhelming, it's a very different kind of a thing, and it could be interpreted as fun. So those are extreme examples, but there are lots of less extreme examples that influence the way that you experience events and the way that you remember them. And then evocative was what I was talking about earlier. The child that is agreeable, quiet, laughs a lot, cries a lot, evokes from the environment different kinds of reactions from people, and those have a transactional effect as well. So all of those things can influence how personality is playing out over the lifespan. So rank order stability. If you're the most extroverted person in your kindergarten class, you might be the most extroverted child in your high school class, and also the most extroverted person in the retirement community when you eventually get there. So you tend to be, it does change, but it changes for everybody. And your rank within your age cohort, for example, tends to remain relatively stable across the lifespan. So it doesn't mean that it doesn't change, but it changes for everybody, and you sort of retain your rank, so to speak, within that group. What else? Research on the development. When we think about cohort effects, there was a lot of research that Glenn Elder and colleagues at the University of, I think it was at UNC Chapel Hill, yeah, it was, did on the development of people who grew up during the Great Depression. So that was a pretty long time ago. It was a really long time ago, especially for you all. So if you think about the Great Recession in the United States from the end of 2007 through 2009, that changed a lot about how we live in America. And it had an enormous impact on people who were working, who were just about to enter the workforce at that time. And so that can influence how they develop and how they treat their children and how they react to all kinds of things over time. So there are events that happen to a whole cohort of people at the same time that can change how they think about things, and that can have an influence on the development of personality as well. The social clock. The book talks about the social clock so we can debate whether a masculine social clock is really masculine and a feminine social clock is really feminine. But if you use those definitions, just for lack of better ones for today, following a social clock, having an idea of what the right time is to do certain things, and trying to hit some of those milestones, whether you hit them or not, but trying to hit some of them is better than not having any idea at all. So the research on the social clock is sort of varied, but essentially, I think the short answer is having some sort of an idea of what's appropriate in your culture, in the world that you're living in, can be helpful in the development of personality, and can be helpful. Next thing in the book talks about narrative identity. I asked you to read a Dan McAdams article. It was optional early in the semester. It's going to be required towards the end of the semester. But McAdams is referred to quite a bit throughout this book. And his idea is that the way that we think about ourselves, the narrative that we speak about ourselves, both influences and is influenced by our own lives. And so early in life, we are an actor in our own story, right? Things are happening to us. We're reacting to those things. Things are changing. And you can sort of view that from the perspective of you're the actor in that play. As you get a little bit older, you start to understand that you have agency, that things don't just happen to you, but things happen and you have a choice about how you react to them. Some people have more choices than others. Bad things happen to good people. I try and say that as often as I can. But thinking about your life as something that you can influence rather than being a passive recipient of the things that happen can have a different impact on personality. And then even later than that, we become the author of our own life story. And so as a young adult, you may already be telling a life story about what your upbringing was like and how that differed from the people around you, for example. I know some people have really interesting life stories. I think everybody has a really interesting life story. Some people are more willing to tell it than others. Everybody has a really interesting life story, and everybody has been influenced by good things and bad things that have happened to them over the course of their life. Interventions. So personality tends to remain relatively stable. It can change if you want to change it. There are different ways to change it. Sometimes a huge life event will have an impact on personality. And so there's some things that those are life experiences that we don't necessarily control. Psychotherapy, you can do a really deep dive on your own thoughts and feelings and talk about that at length, and that can have an influence on personality. Interventions can be either general or targeted. A general intervention usually doesn't have a huge effect on personality because that's not its intent. It has some effect though. And so when you think about preschool programs for disadvantaged children, or education programs that are trying to prevent bullying, or different kinds of interventions, general interventions aren't necessarily targeted at personality per se, but they can have an influence on personality. Some of them, though, are targeted, right? If there's some personality variable that somebody really wants to change, they want to become more extroverted, they want to have less neuroticism or anxiety in their life, they want to be more open to new experiences, there are ways that they can be coached and assisted in identifying the things that might get them to that goal, and sort of what the steps are along the way. So personality generally remains stable, but it can change, particularly if it's something that somebody really, really wants to change. All right. do you want it to change? So personality by definition is stability across situations. And so if you are changing it all of the time, that level of instability can be very difficult for you and for the people around you. So we have to think really long and hard about how much we really want to change our personality, because it changes the fundamental basis of who you are. I would sort of say, changing it, if you want to change it or somebody wants to change it and they think that they can change it, what are the steps that they're going to take to do that? And then how stable will that become? In other words, what are the steps that they're going to take, not only to change their personality if they want to do it in an intentional way, but to have that personality change persist over situations and over time. So that's it for this chapter. I hope you'll find it interesting. This is the end of our unique study of traits. And then next we're going to be turning to biological bases of behavior and some evolutionary, and then some of the other personality theories that are less associated with current research, but always guide and inform current research. So have a great week, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks. Bye.